Welcome to the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove. Today we're going to talk about war and environmental security in a world of climate denial. I want to make 3 points today. The first point is that war is bad. I think most of us can agree with that. Wars don't just kill soldiers, they kill innocent people, destroy homes, infrastructure, food systems, healthcare. I honestly can't think of anything good to say about war. I suppose one can make an argument for defending yourself from hostile aggression. So yes, I can understand a Department of Defense, but I can find no excuse for launching a war on another sovereign country. But that's where environmental security comes in. It's not difficult to empathize with a country whose food or water systems have collapsed due to natural disaster or climate change. In a healthy world, other countries step in to feed and house those people until infrastructure can be restored. And here's my second point. An environmentally degraded world of dwindling resources might force a country to attack its neighbors for the resources their people need to survive. I'm not talking about financial greed, ego, or wanting some other country's oil. We can't drink oil. I'm talking about a nation that is environmentally dying and must migrate to another country by force if necessary in order to survive. We're in a vicious cycle. Climate change is increasing the likelihood of war, and war is increasing climate change. A recent study from the Queen Mary University of London reports that the first 60 days of the war in Gaza created 281,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and that long-term reconstruction in Gaza would likely result in tens of millions more metric tons of emissions. Another study titled Climate Damage Caused by Russia's War in Ukraine, it reports that the first 18 months of that war created 150 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Which brings me to my third point. Climate denialism tends to take environmental security off the table. If you don't believe in climate change, then you don't see the need for environmental security. And a national defense strategy that doesn't consider environmental security is simply more likely to go to war. If you accept climate science, you understand that we have a global problem, which the countries of the world must work together to solve. If you deny the science, then, well, you're simply back to dark age feudalism. It seems that climate denial has now penetrated every aspect of the US federal government. And this climate denialism is leading to policy and military decisions that are ignoring environmental security and leading to one war after another. So let's break this down and talk about war and environmental security in a world of climate denial. We're joined today on Zoom by Dr. Wendell Chris King, retired Brigadier General and Dean Emeritus of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. Dr. King holds a PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Tennessee and 2 master's degrees, a Master of Science in Civil Engineering and a Master of Arts in National Security and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. He's a licensed professional engineer, board certified by the American Academy of Environmental Engineers, and is the recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, the American Academy of Environmental Engineering Honor Award for his work in Kuwait, and the Army Science Award for Outstanding Research in Geophysical Subsurface Remote Sensing. Dr. King is the author of 2 books, Understanding International Environmental Security, a Strategic Military Perspective, and Environmental Engineering, PE Examination Guide and Handbook. He's lectured at over 50 professional conferences, including the technical session of the Copenhagen Climate Summit, at Oxford University on water wars, and at NATO and OSC programs on environmental security. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Bob. Good to be back with you.
It always strikes me that you have something of a split personality. I think you've referenced that. On the one hand, you're a decorated military officer with 36 years of service, followed by another 10 years of service as the academic dean at the U.S. Army's Graduate School for Career Officers. Then on that other hand, you have multiple advanced degrees in environmental engineering. I don't normally think of the military as being concerned about the environment. How have you integrated your environmental expertise with your military service?
Well, that kind of came about. Well, once I'm a Corps of Engineers officer and a Medical Service Corps officer. So in the Army, my 2 basic jobs were building infrastructure and helping the Army meet the environmental regulations that evolved from the early 1970s, because the Army has a lot of bases, has a lot of people that we have to take care of. And that's a big environmental business. We're just a big city, a big city. So I was doing that kind of work as an environmental engineer, a sanitary engineer, and a public health engineer. Some of my military activities would be deploying for humanitarian operations support, such as in Rwanda. When we had 1 million people in Goma, Zaire that had fled from Rwanda during the genocide. The Army was sent over there, the Department of Defense was sent over there to stop the dying from public health issues such as cholera and other diseases. That's where I started seeing my two careers blending together. Yes, I am a military officer. I've studied strategy and policy and all of that, but I have the insight of an environmental background that understands some of they're complex problems, and there's no easy solutions. There's never an easy solution for a large environmental problem, but that's where it really started to come together. And the first book you mentioned, I wrote as I became a faculty member at the United States Military Academy. I was an environmental engineering professor teaching cadets at West Point. Because we had a really smart dean that had the foresight to say, we need a number of officers that can handle those kind of problems, particularly since he was a Corps of Engineer officer in his history. So whether it was just good luck or whatever it is, but it seemed to me my Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of came together when I started studying environmental security in 1992, 1993, when I arrived at West Point. I wasn't going to do geophysics there. I needed another research outlet because if you're at a university, you're supposed to have a research component, your own growth, and environmental security became my interest. At that time, I thought the big issue was going to be water is a scarce resource. And that's very well studied in the Corps of Engineers, and the Army has responsibility for a lot of the waterworks that go on in the United States. I think I was right. And in my first book, I just had an issue identified but not well described about climate change as being another environmental security issue that was growing in interest. But we really in 1990 didn't know a tremendous amount about how our climate works. And so from 1992, 93, I have been focused on environmental security, and as the climate denial machine built, and it is a machine, and it's well oiled by money from oil. It just didn't make sense. The science wasn't supporting that denial approach that I was seeing, and I got more and more into the science of that, which is my real interest. I'm more interested in the science than I am the high end of politics. So that's really where it came together. And what I wanted to talk to today is about a paper and a research effort I just put together to kind of go over the history of developing a better understanding of climate change. And it was done and directed by the UN, and they formed a group called the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. And 195 countries joined. Over 2,000 scientists in 1988 started examining, trying to answer the questions that we needed to. Is climate change real? Is climate change, what's it caused by? Is it caused by human activity? Is it caused by natural causes? Of course, the answer was always obvious. It's both. There will always be naturally driven climate change, but that operates on thousand-year cycle. But what we've seen since we started having good recorded data in the 1850s and 1860s has seen a very rapid change in our climate. And there was questions of how much was what. And so we've been at that study 40 years. The IPCC has been writing studies. They've got 6 that they published now. And what have we learned in those 6? How good was that research? What can we do to go forward with positive reactions and responses and take on climate change in a positive sense rather than a very negative sense of being reactive to whatever it brings our way? And so I think that's a good thing to study. Basically, when you talk about climate denial, the science is there now. Let's take a look and see what it says. So that's what I'd like to spend some time on today, talking to you about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know the IPCC. I mean, as you said, started in 1988. The mandate was for them to provide those regular assessments on climate for policymakers to help guide negotiations and help policymakers good decisions, not only about the future risk, but also proposing adaptations and mitigation options. Do you feel like the IPCC has been successful?
I think in my paper, I have irrefutable evidence that it was an absolute success. Uh, and what I did was, because I'm an environmental security person foremost, I'm not a climate scientist, uh, not running big fancy computers that do those models and stuff like that. But what I did was took and marched through the last 40 years and those six reports and followed their findings and recommendations on those things in climate change that are most important to environmental security. Water is a scarce resource, sea level rise, changes in precipitation, changes in the snow and ice cover, droughts and drying and flooding. All of those things have serious implications for human security. Now,
Mhm.
my definition in environmental security is that any change in the environment, whether natural or man made, that denies people their basic human requirements is an environmental security issue and needs to be examined for what it does to both their national security and international security. And those things that I just read out, I go through in other work that I've done and describe whether it causes mass migrations, whether it causes increases in disease, whether it causes famine, loss of arable lands that then create famine, and those all of those implications, primary and secondary effects, come out of climate change that then produce environmental security issues. And I took and went through all six of the reports and followed the changes that we saw in those reports. And the most important thing I found in the rigor that they used to determine the confidence that they have in a particular recommendation was critically important to the success of the IPCC. Let me give you an example. For global warming and the first thing is AR1, the first one they published in 1990, all they did was basically describe the parameters of climate change. What are we going to measure? We're going to measure sea level rise. We're going to measure the changes in temperature. We're going to measure those changes in precipitation. And so basically, they defined the problem in AR1. They didn't make any gross, large assumptions about anything. And for example, their prediction on global warming, they predicted by 2025, the Earth overall would warm 1 degree centigrade, plus or minus some. But they said that that prediction, based on the data that was available, was as likely as not 50-50, 50-50. In AR6, they published the results. In 2025, the Earth overall will warm by 1.09 degrees, and 1.7 degrees of that will be human caused. And the confidence interval, based on the data that they had collected over those 40 years, was irrevocable. They are 100% certain that that's the number. Two things. One, what an amazing job they did with their estimate without all of that data in 1990. They missed by 0.09. And second was, we have gone from very modest confidence interval to being certain that human caused climate change is what we're living with and what we're going to continue to live with if we don't get a hold of the amount of greenhouse gases that we're putting into the environment every year.
So when you look at the arc of these six assessment reports the IPCC has done over the last 40 years, their predictions have been pretty good. Yet at the same time, the climate deniers, and this is kind of where we're focusing on, the climate deniers are looking at these assessment reports and saying they're wrong, that the science is bad. Where does this data come from? And what are the methodologies? How do we know this science is right?
Okay. The IPCC, in and of itself, as that group, does no independent basic science research. They collect basic science research from everybody in the world that is contributing to the body of knowledge. They then have built, with more than 2,000 scientists there, a process to determine the value of that piece of data. So somebody publishes a study that says all of the ice is going to be gone in 30 years. First thing they do is they validate the work that's there. Then they look to compile work from others that supports that. So what you end up with is two factors. How good was their science? And is there supporting data or collaborating data that says it's not just this guy, but four other people have shown and validated that work? So what they have is they have a system that determines both the probability of it and the confidence that we can have in that. And where you have lots of data supporting a finding, then you get the higher and higher levels of confidence. And every piece of data that IPCC gets goes through that very, very rigorous process. To me, it's probably the most well-studied set of research data that we've ever seen. We never had the money and we never had the motivation to do that kind of rigor on every piece of work that gets into their report. Now, if there's a piece of work that's very, very important, but doesn't have the validation because this is the first time it's come up, that gets maybe published because if it's really, really important, people need to consider it. But by publishing it, what they do is encourage other people to go then validate it. And if you're in the university system, people get promoted because of publishing good work and creating new science in their discipline. It's like to be promoted to the next rank, you have to have really good work and stuff like this. The IPC system is like the biggest naysayers they can find. Their job is to prove you wrong. And when they don't prove you wrong, that shows the value of the work that you've done. And that's typical. We always go with the null hypothesis when we evaluate stuff. So you have a group of people looking at your work that would like for it to be wrong. But when the IPCC goes through the approval process and accepts it, that's really tremendous power and the value of what they're publishing. And then the recommendations they can make from that have that same validity. And so very, very few of the things I have seen in there were errors. There were some, a good example, the best example I've had is the amount of ice and snow cover and how fast that we were losing that on the big ice sheets in the Tibetan Plateau. You know that's my favorite because that has the highest possibility of military concern. We can talk about that if you want, but we misestimated the rate of loss of ice and snow cover. That is probably the largest error I saw in it. And it wasn't an error. It's just that of the error bounds they put on it when they initially looked at it, it was at the very high end and not at the middle of what they estimated the rate of loss of snow and ice cover from land masses and the Arctics.
You're talking about peer review.
Yeah.
You mentioned like 2,000 scientists from around the world. I mean, how do you get 2,000 scientists to agree on anything?
You can't. Well, the idea that the deniers say, well, they've all got together and they formed this group and they're trying to deceive us. Like you said, you can't get them to agree on anything, and you will never get them to agree on something that isn't supported by the sciences. So that's an absurd statement to say that the scientists are fixing the data. It just, as you pointed out, it's just impossible to do that. But when you do get 2,000 scientists that will agree on something, wow, that's powerful. That
must be good.
That's really powerful.
Talk to us about confidence levels. I know the IPCC uses a range of confidence levels.
Yeah, they will list their confidence interval, and basically it has like seven levels of confidence that they have in stuff. This didn't actually get published until AR5, but they published the confidence interval based on that two-step process of how much data is there and how strong is the evidence that's supporting that. They start at unlikely, likely is not, very likely you're getting into the 90 percentile. There are percentages there. Virtually certain, 95%, unequivocal, 100% certain, that that is a true statement. That is a true evaluation. So each thing that they do now has those 6 confidence intervals applied to the findings and recommendations that they make, supported and built around that 2-step process I talked about. I've never seen anything as that much detail in trying to. What you're doing is you're taking quantitative data and evaluate it with a qualitative model, which is very, very difficult. But there's science that allows you to do that. And that's what they have applied in. Well, actually, we do it in strategic studies too, because you have this qualitative, you're intelligent. How good is it? Well, you have to go through some process to say, that we can't take chances based on that. But this is as good a system as I've ever seen. It took 25 years to develop, but this is what's applied in 5 and 6. They had this general process, but not the rigor in the earlier. So for my work on AR 1, 2, 3, and 4, I had to interpolate back because I showed the confidence intervals for each one of those in my work in the report and the report that you're going to actually make available to the folks. They can go in there and see how that developed there. So most of the things that you see in AR6 as far as the confidence they had in global warming and sea level rise, they're all either virtually certain, very few are unequivocal. It's either virtually certain or highly likely. So it's 90% plus, but some of them 100% for those.
So
Go ahead, please.
yeah, so it's a very rigorous system. We're talking about drawing the science from the world, from scientists, reaching some sort of consensus level among those 2,000 scientists from across the world, and then even within that context, they're assigning this level of confidence to say, yeah, this is unequivocal. Everybody agrees on this, or this is very likely. Most people agree on this. So they're just really conveying the scientific data to the policymakers that need that data. That's their purpose, not to create science, not to create answers, but to just convey the best science that's available out there.
Yeah, they got the best scientific numbers, and then they tried to present them in a more understandable way for the decision makers. Some of those science reports are 4,000 pages, but for every one of the reports, they do this thing called readings for the decision maker. It's a summary report for the decision maker. Each one of them, it's usually about 40 to 50 pages, and they write it in terms that it's for people who aren't scientists, but who are making decisions. They're not insulting anybody. These are smart people that are usually, I'll caveat that, usually smart people that are making these decisions, but they're not the scientists. And so I know I did. I evolved to not trying to speak in fancy science, but try to be more understandable to smart lay people who care about the environment, care about what this means to our world, but just don't have the scientific background to worry about the thermodynamics and the meteorology and the other atmospheric scientists. And there's a lot of science in this stuff. There's no question about it. But
yeah, the assessment reports actually are composed of 3 sub-reports. I mean, there's the technical, here's the hard science, and then there's
yeah,
mitigation
and adaptation.
adaptations. I mean, that's a lot of work. And I'm one of those persons that reads the summary for policymakers. It's just in plain English. I mean, I don't need the hard numbers. I mean, if I want them, they're there. But that makes sense. You know, that 40 pages, whatever, I can kind of get the gist of what's going on, and then I can drill down into those thousands of other pages if I need. So this is a really robust system.
Yeah, I think that was brilliant when they did that. I admit I read only one full science report. It was 4,000 papers, 3,900 and something pages. I breezed through some of the other studies, but yes, the stuff that really, really is most important comes in that summary for policymakers, SPM. They're on the IPCC website, and they're not more than 40 or 50 pages. And that one rolls in all 3 of the sub-reports into one summary for policymaker now. Initially, they were putting one summary for each one of the 3, but I think they've now gone to,
It's now down to 1.
yeah, keep it simple.
What about futures? I mean, part of what the IPCC doing is mitigation adaptations. They're predicting what the future will look like. And how do they do that? Are they just assuming business as usual? Or are they looking at higher, lower
Oh,
emissions?
okay. Great point. That's, I think, one of the challenges they had to deal with early on, because the independent variable is how much puke are we going to continue to dump into the atmosphere? How much greenhouse gases are we going to release next and the year after that? So what they came up with is a set of 5 different predictive models. So the lowest amount of greenhouse gases that will be studied is the amount that it takes to reach a particular goal. So we want to stop warming at 1.5 degrees by 2050 or 1.75 degrees by 2100. How much are we allowed to discharge into the atmosphere over those periods and reach that number? That's the low number. The high number, the fifth number, is business as usual, continuing to dump at the high rates we're dumping now. And so they run 5 different models and see what the impacts of each one of those and report each one of them. So if you're at number 3, you're somewhere between just continuing to dump irresponsibly and getting the control that you really need. What does that mean as far as temperature, sea level rise, loss of arable lands? And that's the way they have done that. And that then allows people to look at consequences. What are the consequences of the decision? We decide that we're going to get to not increasing the amount of greenhouse gases that we release this year, but we're not going to be able to cut them. Okay, that sounds nice, but what does that mean in the changes in temperature? What does that mean in the possibility of extreme weather events? That's the way they've been able to handle that, and it's brilliant. It's a brilliant way to do it. And the deniers are just stuck. There's nothing they can say about that. That's we know exactly how much we're dumping in there. We've got good estimators on it. It's and those estimators have been proven to be true by the work they've done in the IPCC. That's everything's backed up by the science now. That's why we can list things as virtually certain or unequivocal, because the models that we have now to run those estimates are 50 times better than they were when we started. We didn't get the first model to 1967. Now there are 4 or 5 models that compete to be, and some of them work better on certain things than they do others. Some may predict sea level rise better than they predict temperature warming. But between, and IPCC runs all of them. So what they do is they publish the range of things, they use the median value, and that's how they show that it has to be a human cause, because every one of those models predict very accurately what's gone on in the past. That's the way you build the model. You take old data and you model it, and then it has predicted for the last 30 years that range. And that's what they give you. They say the temperature is going to be up 1.5, but the plus or minus, the 99% confidence interval is a range around that all those models give us. And they use that data too as their basis for making. They kind of have done everything that you can do with the data to make people see the options that reasonable people would take to deal with this.
Reasonable people, yes.
I have to limit it.
You're listening to the Climate Hour. We're speaking with Dr. Wendell King about war and environmental security in a world of climate denial. In a recent article, you stated, and I'm going to quote this: well-financed corporations campaign to deny, delay, and to discredit any efforts to boldly step forward with actions to save ourselves. In your judgment, the worst example of this has been the United States government, which now, in the face of overwhelming science, continues to deny climate change is real. It boldly runs away from the fight by reversing all U.S. regulatory efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions implemented for at least the last 20 years, end quote. What are your thoughts on the recent Department of Energy's Climate Working Group report and the EPA's use of that to rescind their 2009 endangerment finding?
I think I cannot use the proper words that really describe how stupid that was. It really it has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with anything but politics. Really, really bad, short-sighted politics. They did away with the air regulations. The canceling the endangerment means that all of the things that we have done to control greenhouse emissions go away. Restarting the coal-fired power plants. You and I have a history, and in my history, I hate coal. I hate coal because uh, the amount of toxic materials that are left after you burn coal are going to torment us for hundreds of years around the United States. There's coal ash piles everywhere, and they're just toxic waste stone, and it's a very inefficient way to get energy. But that aside from it, we don't need that energy to provide the energy we need to continue to run our economy and stuff like that. Just there's no logic, there's no sense to it, and certainly uh, we're going backwards at horrible rates. And being We're going back to where air pollution is going to be a problem because we want to reduce the emissions controls on cars back to when our cities were smog filled and people couldn't breathe. That's the kind of thing that they're putting into place now with the EPA chief and our president driving the train on there. But canceling billions of dollars already spent on developing clean wind energy, and the contracts were building was going on, and they've canceled all of those. We're buying out those contracts, spending billions to stop doing that. The words can't describe the concern we have when we're doing stuff like that. There's just no logic to it.
This is all coming back to that environmental security topic.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I know in the 1990s, U.S. Department of Defense actually had a position of Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. Does that position still exist?
That went away in the mid 90s. They did away with that, and it has never come back. I don't think you could walk up and down the halls of the Pentagon and mention climate change and have a job. Mm-hmm. We had a culling. It was science, but it's also over in the Department of Defense. We do not have a Department of War. Congress decides what the cabinet titles are.
True, but they're still calling it Department of War, which kind of harkens back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, are you the aggressor? Are you defending yourself, or are you the aggressor? I know in 2007, there was like 11 3- and 4-star generals who produced the analysis titled National Security and the Threat of Climate Change.
Yes.
Our national defense strategy, I mean, I think that plays and informs our national defense strategy. What are we doing now? Does our national defense strategy address anything to do with climate change?
It's devoid of anything about climate change. It dropped out in President Trump's first term. It worked its way into, it had its own section at one time in the early 2000s. And certainly after General Sullivan and those other generals published that was published by the Institute for Naval Analysis in Washington, D.C. And it was very, very strong. Environmental security, climate change are one and the same, and it is an extreme threat to our national security. And they were from the Air Force, they were from the Navy, the Marines, some of the most distinguished, recently retired folks. General Sullivan, who ran it, had been the Chief of Staff of the Army, a very visionary man, and we were lucky to have him in the Army. I think he's in the same vein with the Chief of Staff of the Army that was just discharged. Randy George was a brilliant man, and we're a weaker Army because we don't have him as in charge. I think it's been validated by a lot of people.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of career officers are leaving the Pentagon either by choice or by force. Your experience as Dean of the General Staff and Command College, I suspect you know many of these people.
I knew a good number of them. I'm a little bit older than those guys are. General George was a class of 82. I'm a 72 commissioned officer. So he's a little younger than I am, but several of the folks I knew that were really, really talented people. And most of them right now, I think, have left by the request of the Secretary of Defense or the maybe even the White House. I don't know, but we're not better for it. I am absolutely sure of that. Certainly, when you're in the middle of fighting a war, uh, your strategic leaders aren't the people. That's the time that if people say, we got a problem with our plan or a problem with our strategy, we need to be listening to. We play war games all the time, and we have the people that are supposed to tell us what's wrong with that, and then we learn how to make changes and adapt and stuff. If there's nobody there that tell you, your clothes are gone, uh, you're just running around naked.
It seems that our Department of Wars, they're now calling themselves, it seems like they're adopting this war footing against oil producing nations, Venezuela, Iran, those places like that. And, I know within the climate environmental security, fossil fuels is obviously a big issue, but I really don't understand why we're going after these oil producing nations. Do you have any insight or thoughts
I
on
have
that?
I have no idea what's the strategy, what's the need. Uh, I know Iran has been a supporter of terrorism for a long time.
Mhm.
We knew that in 2003 when we went back into Iraq. Uh, the government that's there now has committed terrorist acts all over the world. Understand that. That is true.
Mhm.
Uh, But if that's true and that's the our purpose in being in there, what's the strategy? What what are we going to achieve? The idea that it was the nuclear thing seems to have been uh, dashed because supposedly we destroyed that in the first set of bombings, but it shouldn't have been there if we destroyed it in the first set of bombings. So uh, I'm not going to defend Iran particularly there. Uh, they have been a problem nation for a long time for many of their neighbors and for us. But uh, what we did when we went in to uh, recover Kuwait was that we had a collaboration with the neighbors from there, with NATO, with everybody agreed that's what we needed to do, uh, and we went and we kicked Iraq out of Kuwait. Uh, but that was done as a coalition. It's scary when we can't get a coalition together. We don't have an idea that is so profoundly supported by other nations that we've run our friends off. Uh, we talk about, well, NATO didn't do this and NATO didn't do that. And when I was in my last deployment was into Afghanistan, and NATO was there. All the nations of NATO were there. We were the big actor, but everybody was there trying to do the mission that we had. And if you don't know the mission, it's kind of hard to know what you're up to. And if you're not there with your friends, it's a real important question to ask. Why not? That question needs to be answered. Why does Britain and France and uh, nations that have always been there. I mean, even if they didn't agree with us, Australia and those nations were there because we had developed a partnership and I guess a respect for uh, what we had chosen to do. But wow, it's not scary because of, the massive power that they always brought, but the ideas that we're defending and fighting for should be uh, stuff that they're interested in too. Especially I know in Iran because we've all had problems and uh, been concerned about the way that's kind of the single most important thing for terrorists to do is get the support of Iran for whatever they're doing, whether it's the Houthis or uh, Somali pirate, whomever it is that they will support as you know a partner in crime. I guess you would say it is because their actions are criminal too. Uh, I, I feel sorry for the people in Iran. I don't think the vast majority of them want that. I really feel sorry for the people in Afghanistan. I thought that the majority of those people are wonderful people. They're very, very pious in their religion. They're family oriented. They want, it's back to environmental security. They wanted food and water and safety for their families. We didn't deliver that. That's going to be studies that people are going to look at for a while. But the war in Afghan and Iran now, we just don't know what's the goal, what's the end state. I mean, people keep saying that, but for military strategy and policy, that's the most important thing you have is when do you know you've won?
How,
Uh,
how important do you consider NATO?
they have kept us all safe since 1945. They achieved the goal of taking down the Iron Curtain, uh, turned uh, countries that were being occupied by the Soviet Union into free states and allowed them to follow their own direction, whether it's democracy or some other form of government. Uh, I, one of my experiences was after the wall came down, I went into East Germany, actually cleaning up military waste that the Russians had left there. And I thought, oh man, I'm going into a country that was in the part of the country that was in East Germany, and I'm not going to be well received. Uh, that was not the case. They were an occupied nation, East Germany. They did not like the Russians being there. They didn't like what the Russians did. Uh, that was 1994, and there were still blown out buildings and stuff in this little town that I went into because they hadn't had money to fix the roofs on the houses that were hit during the war, stuff like that. Russia had done nothing to rebuild the country; they just occupied it. Uh, NATO was what did that. It was us, but it was NATO working together. It was all those countries working together. I always, when I teach, I say nobody's as smart as everybody. So we look for those ideas that people contribute to. And I think nobody is as safe by themselves as with groups of like minds and like interests, and the will to support that. And we're giving that up when we walk away from NATO. We cannot uh, walk away from NATO or the UN or get up and walk out of the climate change. We left uh, the Paris Accords and canceled all of our participation in the IPCC, except for individual researchers are still doing it and supporting that. Not a good choice. Not a good choice.
I love that phrase, what you just said. Nobody's as smart as everybody.
It's true. It's true. And when you're doing professional work there, one person sitting in the back hardly ever says anything, probably has the best idea. You just got to be smart enough to listen to them.
It seems like we're struggling with climate denialism here in the United States, with it entering into our governments, our agencies, that kind of stuff. How do we, as U.S. citizens, how do we best go about stopping this migration towards climate denialism in government?
Got to be political change. It really does. Uh, and I've spent my whole life as a Republican because that's what I was taught by my grandparents, and I don't think either one of the parties that we have seems to have an approach that's worthy of pursuing that I've seen.
You've jokingly suggested that a large-scale nuclear war might be a better future than our current path of ever-increasing greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, I caveated that because that was a completely unstudied opinion that I'd come up with. But if we get to continue to just discharge and discharge and discharge, you get to a point that there's no turning back. The natural systems will take over and change the structure of the Earth's surface to meet the new paradigm, which is 4, 5, 6 degrees centigrade warmer than it is right now. And that doesn't support human activity. It doesn't support anything. Uh, 5 or 6 billion people dying off immediately, and a nuclear winter coming in for 10 or 20 years. may be more survivable than what we're talking about, a long-term continuing assault uh, on our climate. People weren't always on the face of this earth. We're not sure exactly what all that means as far as, they find new evidence about things that look like uh, previous uh, very smart societies. I don't know what to say about that. And then we got the alien guys coming in, but I was trying to provoke with that. I'll admit it. I was trying to provoke people to think about why the hell would he say something like that? It's because that outcome is known and it's probably survivable, not for 10.3 million, 10.3 billion people, but it may be survivable for 500 million people in certain isolated places in the world that don't get heavily impacted about it. And then our discharges of climate change gases will go way down.
What I'm hearing you say is the species would survive a nuclear war, but it may not survive what we're doing to the planet in terms of greenhouse
That's
gas
the
emissions.
long, if you just keep going forever, that's exactly what I was saying. And trying to make people think about, is it that dire? Well, if you don't have an end to it, yes, it is that dire.
Indeed.
The last little bit I had to offer was tying my environmental security back to uh, the issues that climate change produces and the kinds of impacts that's going to have on the world from a security standpoint. Sea level rise is going to be a very, very, very uh, dangerous uh, a thing as it continues to grow, and it seems to be accelerating uh, because mainly because the warming at the poles is much higher than once the ice is gone there, then all of that heat that's landing there is now going into the ocean rather than being reflected back to, and so that's got a feedback mechanism that's accelerating that. Uh, there's several reports out now about the global changes in the ocean currents that are occurring. There's a set of currents in the Atlantic Ocean that have feedback of warming and cooling water. They're trying to mix. The cold water comes down, more dense, comes along the coast. Uh, the the ecosystems are destroyed. The fishing systems are destroyed. Uh, and the sea level is rising. All of those things have impacts on people that live near the coast. I always use, because I have good friends from there, Bangladesh as a case study, an example. Everything that bad that can happen from climate change is going to hit poor Bangladesh. They have 50 million people that live right by the water, either on the rivers or on the coastal. It's not because that's the best place to live. It's because that's a place that has hugely growing populations, and the good land is already taken. I refer to it, these are the people that live in the margins. They don't want to be there. They do have flooding problems. Hundreds of thousands of Bangladeshis have died from flooding, kind of more natural there. But now with sea level rise and with the loss of ice and snow, uh, they're going to have flooding in the springtime. They're going to be dry in the summer, and sea level rise is going to displace 35 to 50 million of those people. So where do they go? Well,
Exactly.
their neighbors don't want them. Uh, Europe doesn't want them. There's no place. The war in Syria displaced about 3 million people, and the whole world struggled to handle those people as they were migrating out of there because of just really horrendous war going on there. No concern at all about collateral damage, trying to kill civilians to try to run them out so that one group gets to be in charge. 50 million people, there is no place for them to go. We can't do a humanitarian op and support them. There's not anybody in the world, as you said, to go help them. You cannot do that. And that's just one example where these kinds of things are going to occur over the next 20 to 50 years, uh, more and more often. The United States is not free from it. Our big concerns will be uh, the extreme weather events, such as the hurricanes and stuff, and more tornadoes and more flooding. it's going to destroy us. Look at the insurance rates in places like, well, any place that's on the coast.
Uh,
People, some of them can't get insurance anymore. That's really climate change. That's if you get it all the way dig down, it's climate change is so that the insurance guys say it's too risky for us to put our money into that place, no matter what we charge them.
well, thank you for joining us today. Our conversations are always very thought-provoking. And thank you to our listeners. Dr. King's new paper, the IPCC 40 Years of Great Science and Understanding Climate Change, can be found on the Climate Hour's website. We welcome your questions and feedback. Climate Hour at climatehour.net. It's climatehour.net. This is the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove.